Page 30. 6. The church-state issue continues to be one of extreme sensitivity in the Jewish community. Myths and stereotypes still abound, often reflecting deeply ingrained fears rather than a careful analysis of the subject. Still, there is no doubt that this is a volatile issue for the Jewish community, and one which Republicans must deal with sensitively if they want more Jewish support. The Jewish vote can no longer be viewed, either internally or externally, as monolithic. No major party can take the Jewish vote for granted. Such two-party competition is a good thing for the Jewish community and for the political parties. It shows that Jews are neither a single issue nor a single-party constituency. Jews can best maximize their influence on the political process when it is recognized that they must be assiduously courted by both parties. Richard D. Zeelan, Assistant Area Director, American Jewish Committee, Chicago. Since the election, the press has focused some attention on a row between prominent Jewish leaders over the size of the Jewish vote for President Reagan. Stories about this controversy have appeared in major newspapers throughout the country. This has made for fascinating copy, if only because of the important political implications involved, but there can be no argument about the overwhelming Jewish support for Walter Mondale. Exit polls, the most reliable and accurate measure of election returns now available, showed that he carried the Jewish community by a margin of 2-1. Something far more interesting has been overlooked in all this: the Jewish community's continuing commitment to liberalism. Notwithstanding many political commentators' hopes or expectations to the contrary, a recent survey commissioned by the American Jewish Committee during the 1984 presidential campaign shows that a major Jewish shift to the political right has not come to pass. Indeed, it indicates that while there has been some decline in support for the Democratic Party and a modest shift toward the right, the Jewish community continues to be, relative to the nation at large, on the left of the political spectrum. This is reflected in the responses on political ideology. Of the 959 Jews included in the sample, 1% considered themselves as radical or socialist, 35% as liberal, 38% as middle of the road, 24% as conservative, and 1% as very conservative. It is also evidenced by the figures on party identification. When asked which party they most closely identified with, 12% identified themselves as Republicans, 57% as Democrats, and 31% as independents. By way of comparison, a New York Times CBS poll, conducted at the same time, reported that 39% of the American public, page 31, identified themselves as Republicans, 50% as Democrats, and 11% as independents. In addition to providing a general picture of the political outlook of American Jews, the survey also includes some interesting data on their attitudes on a variety of domestic and foreign policy issues. It reveals that a majority of those polled expressed the following opinions. They oppose the imposition of job quotas but favor other forms of affirmative action to promote equal opportunities for minorities. They support the goals and philosophy of social welfare programs, but question the efficiency and effectiveness of such programs. They favor the separation of church and state in relation to tuition tax credits for parochial schools and silent meditation in public schools, but are nearly divided over the importance of religion in matters of public morality. They support a dovish or detentist approach in the United States dealings with the Soviet Union. They would like to see less spending for the United States military, but favor strong military backing of Israel. I could continue to go on, but suffice it to say that on these and several other timely issues, most but not all of those surveyed came down on the liberal side of the questions. This is remarkable, given that the survey was designed in such a way as to give them an opportunity to reject liberal positions by juxtaposing them with stands favoring a more narrow conception of group interest. It's even more remarkable considering the increasing affluence and assimilation of the Jewish community, the upsurge of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism in certain quarters of the left, and the more recent controversy sparked by presidential candidate Jesse Jackson and his follower Minister Louis Farrakhan, the head of the Nation of Islam. Indeed, the findings of the survey run counter to everything we know about ethnic and religious group politics. As groups become wealthier and better educated, they tend to become more conservative and shift their loyalty to the Republican Party. This has certainly been the experience of most, if not all, white ethnic and religious groups in America. The only exception has been, and continues to be, the Jews. What accounts for this? How does one explain the Jewish community's commitment to liberalism in the face of pressures pushing them in a more conservative direction? Despite having made it, Jews still feel very anxious and insecure about their place in American society. While deeply troubled by threats to their so-called interests from various radical groups on the left, Jews perceive an equal if not far greater danger posed by the rise of Christian fundamentalists. Indeed, Reagan's embrace of the Christian right, probably more than anything else, turned the Jewish community against him. Had the election taken place before the Dallas Convention, I am certain he would have gotten more Jewish votes. Page 32. This concern about church-state matters was not only a major factor in the presidential election. It also came into play in the key U.S. Senate race in Illinois between Charles Percy and Paul Simon. Granted, Percy was not liked because of his views on the Middle East, but his vociferous support of school prayer alienated many Jewish voters otherwise sympathetic to him. Not surprisingly, exit polls showed that Percy's support from Jews declined considerably. In 1978, he received 55% of their vote, and in 1984, roughly 20%. This drop in support was one among a number of factors that contributed to his defeat. The Jewish community is not opposed to religion or to religiously grounded values in the public arena. Far from it. Like other Americans, Jews are deeply concerned about the breakdown of traditional values in recent years. But they strongly oppose government getting into the business of promoting particular religious beliefs. They believe that, if successful, efforts to Christianize America would put an end to Jewish life in the United States as they have known it. This, of course, does not mean that the Jewish community should become complacent about its enemies on the left. What it means is that in the years ahead, it must brace itself against attacks from both extremes of the political spectrum. Paul Gottfried, Department of History, Rockford College, and editor of Continuity. For those who had hoped for a Jewish turn to the right, the 1984 presidential election was a rude disappointment. Despite the strident anti-Semitism of a leading power broker of the Democratic Party, identified with its left wing, and despite the presence of Jewish neoconservatives among President Reagan's advisors, close to 70% of American Jewish voters opted for Walter Mondale. Reagan's share of the Jewish vote was lower in 1984 than in 1980. The gender gap on social issues, which had worried the president during his campaign, turned out to be a Jewish female issue. Jewish women were more critical of the Reagan administration than were other women for ignoring the feminist agenda. Jewish political preferences in 1984 should have surprised neoconservatives least of all. Survey material published by the American Enterprise Institute last year showed that Jews were generally further to the left on social and economic questions than any other major religious group in America. Jewish conservatives and neoconservatives find it difficult, and indeed embarrassing, to explain this situation. They point to what they consider compelling evidence that American Jews should be on the political intellectual right. They stress the Jewish concern with educational excellence, Jewish professional and commercial achievements, page 33, and the derivation of the moral majority's social ethics from the quintessentially Jewish Old Testament. Jewish conservatives long expected an eruption of anti-communism from their coreligionists as the anti-Israeli and anti-Jewish policies of the Soviet Union became better known. Yet, the general Jewish reaction to Soviet anti-Semitism has been to protest this evil without supporting military and other initiatives intended to counter Soviet power. In a spirited response to his leftist Jewish critics, recently published in Commentary, Irving Kristol expressed what may be the angry frustration of other Jewish conservatives. He scolded Jewish liberals for their anachronistic and destructive fear of devout Christians. This fear led them into denouncing even Philosemitic Christian conservatives, while fawning on the pseudo-Christian left, despite its support for Third World anti-Semitism. Jewish conservatives, I believe, are genuinely mystified by the way the majority of American Jews remain on the left. Having wrongly predicted massive Jewish movement in their own direction, Jewish conservatives now deny the facts of the case by creating more extensive timetables for the predicted change of heart, or else brood over the unwillingness of their coreligionists to think clearly or traditionally. Jewish conservatives can and should follow a third course. It is the one that I recommend for consideration. They should accept the fact that most American Jews think differently from themselves and in all likelihood will do so for at least the foreseeable future. Outside of religiously orthodox circles which have little contact with the dominant Western culture, only a minority of American Jews consider themselves conservative. This minority enjoys exemplary relations with their Christian fellow Americans, and occupy the historically privileged position of seeing the values common to Jewish tradition and Western Christian civilization. Most American Jews do not perceive the existence of such a community of spiritual and ethical values. No matter how knowledgeably or sternly Jewish conservatives react to the anti-Christian siege mentality of the Jewish left, best exemplified in the debate over school prayer, it is doubtful that conservatives will change many minds. They are dealing with garbled folk memories which leftist Jewish organizations, that are often genuinely anti-religious as well as anti-Christian, have brilliantly exploited. Moreover, the guilt-ridden self-doubt which organized Christianity shows may have deepened Jewish distrust of Christians. If Christians have been as wicked as the National Council of Churches would have us believe, then why should non-Christians trust them? I have always believed that if Christians behave with self-respect as well as tolerance, even liberal Jews will feel more respect for them. I am certainly not proposing that all the idiosyncrasies of American Jewish politics are traceable to the fear of Christians. In fact, some of these quirks strike me as utterly baffling. Page 34. Why do American Jewish women, perhaps the most fortunate and most pampered group in human history, bewail their fate as members of an oppressed class? Even more bemusing are the husbands of such women, who treat their wives' implausible complaints as deep truths. Nor can I find Jewish reasons why Jews in increasing numbers advocate gay rights. Such a stand, as Seymour Siegel and Jacob Petachowski have reminded us, is totally incompatible with the teachings of biblical and rabbinic Judaism. What Jewish liberals deny in their attempt to legitimate perverse social behavior is the universalist aspect of Jewish ethics. It is the Jewish rite which insists on applying the Noahic commandments. These commandments given in Genesis to all the descendants of Noah prescribe the laws of social decency incumbent on Gentiles as well as Jews. The moral majority's campaign against raising the political status of gays should be a Jewish battle, not only a Christian one. Yet, Jewish religious organizations, save for Orthodox ones, have taken emphatic positions against discrimination in any form on the basis of sexual preference. Perhaps one may be able to explain the otherwise puzzling distaste among Jewish liberals for capitalism by examining certain aspects of Jewish social ethics. Although the Jewish tradition, rabbinic or normative, takes a generally positive view of wealth, Judaism has never been as individualistic as Protestantism in its view of man's relationship to God. Jews are required to live and pray among other Jews. The commandments through which they must earn their salvation are, for the most part, to be carried out Batzaber, in a communal setting. Eastern European Jewry, from which most American Jews are descended, aimed at being a ritually and culturally unified community. Although this ethic of communal authority was certainly not egalitarian or secularist, it nonetheless did not prepare Jews to be capitalists in spirit. It may also have left its imprint on Jewish socialists, however much they rebelled against rabbinical authorities, in Eastern Europe and in America. The Israeli sociologist Arieh Fishman has written extensively on the specifically Jewish understanding of economic modernization. Fishman accepts Werner Sombart's view of a strong modernizing impulse in rabbinic Judaism. But like the later Sombart, not the earlier one who wrote The Jews and Modern Capitalism, Fishman argues that the Jewish modernizing impulse is tied to collective rather than individual forms of activity. Jews have usually been capitalists, faute de mieux, where the opportunity for material improvement in a form consistent with their religious ethical values has simply not existed. I realize that Fishman's views conflict with those I myself defended in this journal. But there may be reason for at least qualifying the correlation, which I tried to demonstrate between normative Judaism and capitalism. Perhaps, like Sombart, I inferred too much about Jewish culture in general from the progressive commercial practices of ancient Babylonian Jewry and the critical role of Sephardic and some German Jews in creating the finance capitalism of early modern Europe. One should note that Sombart, who used such findings to draw his picture of Jews as individualistic capitalists, page 35, later revised his own characterization. In Proletarian Socialism, Sombart suggests that the Jewish approach to economic modernization is fully consistent with socialism. No doubt Sombart was impressed by the overwhelming support that Jews gave to the socialist movement in Germany and Austria. Jewish merchants and professionals had voted for the socialists in Imperial Germany, even against candidates who were less anti-Semitic and who favored their economic interests. In America, the Jewish left combines extreme permissiveness in moral social matters with economic collectivism. Its public support of moral agnosticism reflects a fear of traditional Christians. Its economic stand may be an attempt to translate Jewish communal values into antiseptically secular politics. I make these observations entirely without pleasure. I deeply hope that my view of the basic ineradicability of the leftist mindset among American Jews proves to be untrue. But if fear of heaven is the beginning of spiritual wisdom, then sober realism may be the precondition for understanding society. Jewish conservatives at this time may need realism even more than fear of heaven. Seymour Siegel, Executive Director, United States Holocaust Memorial Council. Notwithstanding the historic Reagan-Bush sweep of the 1984 elections, two groups stood out as supporters of the Mondale-Ferraro ticket: the blacks and the Jews. While there is doubt as to the extent of the Jewish vote for the Democrats, some say 70%. Others assert that it was 60%. There is no doubt that the Jewish voter was not part of the national outpouring for President Reagan. This was not due to a lack of effort. There was a well-financed and well-staffed Jewish effort on behalf of the Republican ticket. Still, the Jews, alone among white ethnic groups, stuck with their traditional Democratic leanings. The question is why? What can be done about it? It seems from the plethora of comment on the results of the elections that the Jewish voter was swayed by two main factors: the compassion issue and the perception that Reagan had somehow launched an attack on the separation of church and state. Jews, notwithstanding their economic status, are swayed by assertions that one candidate is against the poor. Whether it be a result of their prophetic tradition or some other factor, the Jewish voter likes to see himself as one who backs those who care about the disadvantaged. The Democrats succeeded in painting their adversary as one who was insensitive to the needs of the poor and the lower strata of our society. Page 36. This assertion holds much weight for the average Jewish voter, though he himself is far from being on the lowest rung of the economic or social ladder. The Jewish community was unimpressed with the arguments of the Republican National Campaign that the efforts to lower inflation have been a boon to the poor, and that while unessential programs may have been slashed, essential programs have not been touched. The failure to respond positively to the Reagan claims is the result of clever and apparently effective propaganda on behalf of the Mondale-Ferraro team. But it also points out the need for the Republican Party to dispel the image of a hard-hearted, well-to-do group which doesn't care for the poor. The church-state controversy is more complicated. The Jewish voter sees shades of anti-Semitism in a strong assertion of Christian influence. It is a throwback to the lamentable experiences Jews have had with most branches of Christianity, especially in the pre-Holocaust era. Jews have not been convinced, by and large, that Christianity is friendly to Judaism and to Jewish interests. Witness the impressive outpouring of sympathy and support for the State of Israel among the non-Jewish, especially fundamentalist Christian, elements of our society, which has so far failed to persuade Jews of its benign intent. It is ironic and even a little sad that the Jewish community, which is above all a religiously committed group, should see in the resurgence of a sister faith a threat, even a danger. The fact is that the policies of such well-known groups as the moral majority coincide with basic traditional Jewish values. The picture of a strong family emphasis on life and anti-communism is reflective of Jewish interest. Somehow, the Jewish leadership has come to believe that any government friendliness toward religion is a breach of the establishment doctrine. This is not accurate. On the contrary, emphasis on the religious roots of our culture can only help Judaic culture and make it stronger. This obvious fact has not been convincing to the Jewish voter, hence his remaining strong support for Mondale and the Democrats. What can be done? First of all, there has to be a strong educational effort directed toward the community explaining the dimensions of the issue. Second, there has to be stronger personal contacts between Jews and more conservative Christians. This will serve to dispel the feelings that evangelical Christians are basically anti-Jewish. and the Republican Party has to intensify its efforts to reach the Jewish voter and defeat the pernicious myth that Reagan supporters are made up mostly of country club types who, deep down, dislike Jews and the poor. These are big tasks, but it would be wrong to overlook the progress that has been made. The president got close to 40% of the Jewish vote. This in itself is a fact of striking significance in light of the minuscule support past Republican presidential candidates received from the Jewish community. Page 37. Murray Friedman, Regional Director, American Jewish Committee, Philadelphia. Jews are the prototypical liberal group. As the saying goes, they have incomes like Episcopalians but vote like Puerto Ricans. In a period often characterized as increasingly conservative, they have remained determinately liberal. Exit polls released by the New York Times, CBS News, Washington Post, ABC News, and NBC News showed Reagan receiving 32, 31, and 35% of the Jewish vote, respectively, last November. While the National Jewish Coalition, a conservative Jewish group, has disputed these figures, claiming that this vote was 40% or better in the last two national elections, Jews, along with blacks and Hispanics, stood in splendid isolation from the national political consensus. If one looks at local elections in recent years, and the public policy positions Jews take on nuclear disarmament, defense, and urban issues, the liberal character of Jewish voting patterns is even more pronounced. The durable nature of Jewish liberalism over the years is perhaps its most distinguishing feature. When most Jews were immigrant workers and small businessmen, they supported socialists. Then, as a rising but economically insecure middle class, they aligned themselves with Franklin D. Roosevelt and the New Deal. After World War II, as part of the new class of highly educated professionals, they helped to build the reform wing of the Democratic Party and the liberal left critique of American society. Far from undermining liberal commitments, Stephen M. Cohen writes, Jews' changing class character has, in fact, harmonized with liberalism's changing style and content in recent decades. Jews seem to defy all the well-known rules of American politics. Most religio-ethnic groups tend to become more conservative as they become more integrated and more affluent. Irish, Polish, and Italian Catholics, for example, have begun to move away from their normally democratic moorings. Even though more Orthodox and lower-middle-class Jews have responded more conservatively in recent years, for Jews it would appear the richer they get, the more liberal they become. It is interesting to speculate on why this should be so. Some argue it is due to the biblical and prophetic tradition which, it is said, has put Jews historically on the side of the discriminated against and disadvantaged in society. Undoubtedly, there is much truth to this. My own best explanation is that a certain degree of utopianism characterizes Jewish political thought and behavior. Few groups in society are willing to set aside their own group interests on behalf of what they deem to be the common good. Writing more than 20 years ago, political scientists Edward C. Banfield and James Q. Page 38. Wilson concluded, their political ethos is such that a politics of ethnic appeal strikes them as uninteresting and even immoral. Since the French Revolution, Jews have hitched their star to whatever politics has promised, to create a better world or better society. This is probably closely linked to their bitter history of persecution. In her diary, Anne Frank wrote that, if we bear all this suffering and there are still Jews left when it is over, then Jews will be held up as an example. Who knows, it might even be our religion, from which the world and all people learn good. It is only when Jews feel a direct and immediate threat to their sense of safety and security, as when Israel is endangered or in the matter of the use of racial quotas in affirmative action programs, that they grow more conservative. Even so, this is less than other Americans. Jews still support quotas more than most. My guess is that 50% or better of the Jewish vote would have gone for Reagan this summer when Jesse Jackson and his close supporter Louis Farrakhan were making their outrageous remarks, were it not for the emergence of the Christian right as a greater worry. In the final analysis, the election reflected a choice of fear. Jews were more troubled about the Reverend Jerry Falwell than Jackson. Like their utopianism, Jewish anxieties can never be underestimated either. Despite this, there is reason to believe that a respectable Jewish conservative movement has now emerged for the first time. No matter which set of figures one uses on how Jews voted in 1984, it would appear that between 1 out of every 3 and 2 out of every 5 Jewish voters in the last two national elections pulled the lever for Reagan. This is considerably greater than the normal Jewish vote for a Republican candidate. The intellectual basis for a conservative Jewish movement has also been laid. In recent years, a number of well-known and respected Jewish writers have broken with the left and spoken out favorably on such materials as the beneficent values of capitalism, a strong national defense, and the importance of countering the serious threat of Marxist-Leninist expansion around the world. The rise of religious orthodoxy, whose members often have large families, and their growing activism, is also a force of increasing political significance. An invigorated national Jewish coalition has given an organizational basis for some of these trends through a campaign that reached into the 12 states where most Jews live. Its computerized mailing lists will provide a leg up for right-of-center candidates in 1988. Flashpoints of controversy between blacks and Jews exist that periodically are ignited. On the horizon is the New York City mayoralty campaign, in which Ed Koch will seek re-election. Political conservatism still has a long way to go before it can capture a majority of Jews, but 1984 suggests a start has been made.